Hello fellow chess players, it's Max here, and for this training video I will show you how to beat Copycat chess. Now, I'm sure that some of you already know that one way to beat Copycat chess is just to make a check, in that your opponent is not able to counter a check. You know, one example is the classic trap with e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes c5, knight takes c4, and you know, in this case we see that if black keeps copying, that he runs into a little problem that after queen takes c4, that, you know, copying with queen takes c5 would simply lose to queen. So certainly that's the easy way to beat Copycat chess. But what if the opponent does a Copycat in a very solid and strategic position where we don't have a way to simply just win the game like this? Well, that's what we'll be covering in today's game between Magnus Carlsen as white, playing against the top junior player Alireza Firouzja as black in a Lichess bullet match on February 22nd. So let's get into the game. The game went d4, knight to f6, knight f3, g6. So Firouzja plays his favourite King's Indian defence, and Carlsen decides to go for a fianchetto of his own with bishop g7, bishop g2, castles. And then after the move d5, white plays c4, going for the Catalan setup, as it's called when you build the home for your king, and then put your pawns in the centre like this. Black plays the move c6 to solidify his pawn and build a pawn chain against the white bishop. And after takes, we see that the position is once again quite symmetrical here. After knight to c3, knight to c6, white decides to play the move bishop to f4. You know, knight e5 is one way to try to break the symmetry, but white decides to play it a little bit later, where after bishop to f5, rook to c1, and rook to c8. Well, all the pieces are on quite natural squares at this moment, and so white decides to exert some pressure. A move like queen b3 would have been interesting, because it develops the queen, but also puts some pressure against the b7 pawn and the d5 pawns, so that it's no longer so effective for black to copy when white is able to break the symmetry and, you know, double the black pawns with an exchange of queens. That was one approach possible, but Carlsen played the move knight to e5 instead, activating the power of his bishop. Black continued to copy with the move knight to e4, which may not necessarily have been the absolute best decision here, in fact. And the reason is that, basically, after the exchanges, black's structure is going to weaken in some way. Where after knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, Carlsen decided just to exchange a lot of pieces, and I think the reason he went for all these exchanges, like captures, is because we see here that black has these doubled e-pawns. The c6 pawn, a7 pawns are isolated, and an inferior structure gives white some chances to play for an advantage. Actually, a more dynamic approach would have been to play a move like queen c2, and give up the d4 pawn, but then to get the pieces more active in turn. But Carlsen plays a move bishop e3, just to make sure this pawn is well defended. At this point, I think that Firouzja starts to misplay the position. Well, I think it was quite important for him to play the move queen a5 and put some pressure against the a2 pawn, leaving the d8 square for the rook to pressure this pawn. Instead, though, he played the move queen d5, which has the same idea of attacking the a2 pawn and keeping the pressure on d4, but the reason it's less precise is because it allows the white queen to get a lot more active than in the other line, where now the move queen to a4 was played to hit the two black weaknesses on the queen side. And I think white already has a little bit of unpleasant pressure. Well, black played the move rook b8, and this is actually your opportunity to improve on Carlsen's play. Can you play better than the world champion with white? Well, have a think about it, pause the video, and comment below with the move that you would have played in this position. Okay, so the answer is that the move queen takes a7 was actually a free pawn at this point. And the reason is that if you were to play rook takes b2, white now has the move of queen to a8 check, and after bishop to f8 and bishop h6, black has no good way to deal with the pin and the queen takes f8 checkmate coming up. So queen a7 was effectively a free pawn, and of course this being a bullet game, it wouldn't be fair to expect perfection from either side. That said, even the move b3 that Carlsen played still keeps a big advantage, as it defends the pawn under attack. And still, black has the question of how to defend his pawns from the pressure. In the game, Firouzja played rook b7. Probably not the best defense. I think a5 is probably a better try in hindsight to avoid the pin that we're going to see in the game. Well, after rook c1 now, this pawn is under fire. And the only way to really keep the a7 pawn and the c6 pawn still protected is to play rook c7. The problem with that is that now the rook is under a pin, and that might not seem like that big of a deal at the moment, but Carlsen found the way to fully exploit this factor. He played the move of rook to c5, kidding the queen, and after the queen retreated, well, can you find the move that Carlsen played in this position to exploit the pins against the rook and also against the queen? Okay, well done if you found Carlsen's move of pawn to d5. What makes pawn d5 so powerful is that black actually can't take that pawn. Because after c takes d5, white can now play the move of queen takes d7. And if you were to take back the rook, well, then you would have rook to c8. And after bishop f8 and bishop h6, you know, Defima comes up once again as a way to exploit the weak back rank when they fianchetto to do the mate like this with the pin. Of course, rook takes c7 was also winning with very similar ideas. In the game, we had the move h5, which is kind of a desperation at this point. After rook takes c6, black is not able to take the pawn, because then we would play rook takes rook. After rook b7 and queen e4, white is simply up 2 pawns, and the game ended pretty quickly from here. After h4, Carlsen said thank you and went yum-yums with queen h4. And then after queen takes d5, Carlsen found a nice combination to end the game very quickly. What he did was he played the move of rook to c8, and after bishop f8, there's actually a checkmate in 2, where those your advanced players probably saw it already. If you haven't seen it, this is your chance to think about it a bit longer. Okay, congratulations if you found the move rook takes f8. The point being that basically if black takes the rook, or if he moves king g7, well then there will be the move queen to h8 checkmate. And so Firouzja resigned after the move rook takes f8 in the game. So there you are, we learned some very valuable lessons from this game. You know, we learned how to beat copycat chess, we learned how to create pawn weaknesses in the opponent's position, and how to attack those weaknesses. And we also saw some nice tactical ideas of how to exploit the opponent's weak back rank, even when they have a fianchettoed bishop, in order to secure the win and finish with some nice tactics. So yeah, very fun game. And as always, I'd really appreciate it if you can, give a like, to share your thoughts in the comments, and to also consider subscribing to stay up to date with more of these Grandmaster training videos. So make sure also to click the description below for my free course, How to Win at Chess, and I will see you in the next training video, dear students.